Thank you for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the chair and to the committee members and senators. We very much value the opportunity to come here and to support this policy. My name is Dennis Porter. I am the CEO and co-founder of Satoshi Action Fund, which is a public policy advocacy organization. So we focus on going state by state to advocate for what we believe are very pro-Bitcoin and Bitcoin policies. And oftentimes those policies tend to relate a lot to energy policy as well. We very much believe in this policy as an opportunity for Montana to attract a new and growing industry to the state and provide political certainty. The policy itself will allow for job growth in the state. One job is generally created per megawatt that is developed. There's recent news where a 50 megawatt site is being built, so that is, on average about 50 jobs that will be created at that site. These jobs tend to be in rural areas, economically depressed zones, and they are tech jobs, but they are tech jobs that require very minimal training. So whether you are young, whether you're old, whether you understand technology or you do not, whether you have a degree or you have no education whatsoever, these jobs require just simply very minimal education and training time, but they also pay quite significantly above the average for most other industries. There's also the component of a new investment opportunities here for the state of Montana. So on top of the jobs that are being created, oftentimes these Bitcoin miners will invest millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into the jurisdictions with which they are building their operations. We currently have on that same site that is doing 50 megawatts, which may turn into an additional 200 megawatts at another site. But there is $50 million being invested. A lot of this money goes into developing hosting services and electrical infrastructure, which even if we say the Bitcoin mining industry were to disappear tomorrow, any of the money that they've put into investing into electrical infrastructure will be here for the state of Montana to benefit for in perpetuity. There are also other benefits of this technology outside of just jobs and investment. The greatest one, in my opinion, is its ability to positively impact the grid. As we all know, the grid is going through serious strain all over the country, and this technology has the ability to come in and solve a lot of the problems that we face, not only in this state, but all across the USA. It can be an emergency response reserve. It can act as a balancer for load generation and can also monetize excess generation. One of the points that I think was highlighted just a moment ago was the ability to export or find an export for power, except for you don't have to leave the state. You can now bring customers here locally instead of trying to build very large high transmission voltage lines, have those customers purchase the power locally. Going back to the emergency response thing, momentarily, I think it's important to highlight that recently in Texas, there was a winter storm. The polar vortex came down, and in Texas, typically they're not well prepared for very low temperatures. And so there was an emergency on the grid, and due to the programs that they have in place there in the state of Texas, Bitcoin miners were able to contribute roughly 1,500 megawatts of power back to the grid during a time of emergency. Just to put that in context, 1,500 megawatts is roughly enough power to heat 1.5 million small homes. It's also enough power to keep 300 large hospitals online, all during what is a peak demand moment, emergency moment. One other really important component of Bitcoin mining, and I think it's one that often gets attacked for, which is the most interesting to me when I'm going around and speaking about this technology, is that this technology can also have very positive impacts for the environment. It can reduce methane emissions from agriculture, from landfills, and it can also clean up oil and gas operations. It can also bring other great benefits to renewables, which particularly they provide a lot of instability to the grid. So there are positives and negatives to every energy generation source. The negative to renewables is that it is an intermittent energy source, so it doesn't constantly create power, also known as baseload power, which means that there needs to be more and more customers that are capable of balancing out this lack of consistent generation, and Bitcoin mining is according to former FERC economist, there for 20 years and now retired, potentially one of the greatest demand response customers on the planet, which makes it well poised and well suited to solve some of the problems that renewables create for the grid. I'll close there. I can get into a little bit more details of the policy itself, but ultimately I just want to highlight that this is an anti-discrimination bill which prevents local jurisdictions from abusing their power. It also highlights that we don't want to take away all their power. We still want to make sure local jurisdictions have the right to enforce the laws that are on the books. So that's through zoning security, but also through noise security as well. So if there are complaints about Bitcoin miners creating too much noise, we believe that if they're breaking local noise ordinances, then they should have to comply to those local noise ordinances. But if they're not, then they should not be facing any sort of discrimination around the type of noise that they generate. The last one that I think is really important here is energy security for these Bitcoin miners. It was mentioned earlier that this piece of policy creates certainty around rate schedules for Bitcoin miners. We've seen all across the country in states like Idaho and Georgia, where public utility commissions have been lobbied to create special rates for miners which discriminate against them. And we're not against special rates being created for miners. We think that there's actually really a lot of potential of creating specialized rates for these miners who oftentimes have a very unique load profile and can participate in the grid in a way that no other customer can. But we simply don't believe that it is appropriate to have discriminatory rates for an industry or to single out a specific industry. I'll